Hello, my friends. This is Mike, and today is Sunday, December the 13th, and I hope this video finds you well. I've got an ambitious presentation for you today. And what I mean by that is I want to try to touch on a whole bunch of different things, and hopefully I can pull it together in some sort of uh, uh, tangible way that makes sense. So I want to begin by talking about the nightly news. I watched the news. I watched the news, the national news, NBC News, or yesterday. I watched it last night, but it was from the night before, so I'm a day behind. And the reason why I watch it is, um, it's one of those. What's the phrase? When you do something where you know it's not really good for you, but you still like to do it. Dirty little secret. I don't know. Is that the phrase I'm looking for? Whatever. But that's what I like to watch. I like to watch the news, and it confirms what I already know, like how ridiculous the news is. And I'm curious to see what the message is, which is being passed to the masses. And like I'm watching, I'm like, see, I know they do that. I'm just like, all this like confirmation bias sort of thing. And so, guilty little pleasure. That's what it is. Guilty little pleasure. That's my guilty pleasure. So I go and I watch this. I watch it last night, and understandably, the news, particularly the national news, has always been an agent of propaganda. But what is interesting is how that has changed throughout the years, particularly, as news has become more entertainment. Go look at what the news used to look like in the 70s or 80s with no graphics and how boring it was and like what it is nowadays. And what I think is most telling about that is it's talking about the level of consciousness of the viewer. And so the news, I watched it on YouTube. It said there was I think 1.4 million views of it. My guess is most people who watch the news are probably 40 or older. I think people who are younger than that, they get their information from other sources. But anyway, I want to go and jump into this because the thing just blew my mind. As I said before, it's always been propaganda. We always know that. But how it has shifted was, I was, I couldn't believe it. And so primarily, let's go to it right now. So primarily what it was, I don't know, it's 25 minutes maybe. And it's just a commercial. It's one friggin' commercial for the vaccines. And it's, the information isn't told in a way which is supposed to be unbiased. That's at least what news is supposed to be. But it was always biased how it's told anyway. But at least it used to be told in a way that it gave more of an appearance of here's just objective facts, and then you go and you come to your own conclusion. But the truth of the matter is, anytime you tell a story, it is impossible to be objective. That's just the nature of telling stories. Because you decide to put this on the top and this on the bottom, you're going to create a degree of subjectivity of what is more important, less important. So we're going with that coming into it. But that being said, the whole thing is it is an instruction to the people who are watching this of what to expect. It's the breaking news, the vaccine is coming. Then after that, it goes into the story. It really personalizes it, and they tell you about the trials of the companies that have to go and deliver it, and they personalize the story. And then the stories of the great adventure and frontier, which we're all sharing together, of bringing this cutting edge technology and the distribution and logistics of the whole thing. They're telling that story. Then they personalize it a little bit. You have all of these different stories, individual stories, people who've been hurt and harmed by COVID. This one here is kind of funny because they're going to go and make it a little titillating, with the cleavage shot right here. They got this guy telling a story, and I'm looking at him. Now, I'm not saying it's the same guy who they also include Andrew Cuomo in here. I'm not saying this is the same person, but I am saying they look a lot alike. and then what they do is, and how you want to go, and this is just like kind of like propaganda sort of techniques, is people are watching, they're going to have a natural kind of like nervousness, and they're like, oh, can I trust this? Do I trust the news? And so they take that energy, and they're gonna lead it somewhere. They're going to give an opportunity for that like nervous tension to be released. And so right here they did a little story about like, should pregnant women take it, and like the question is like, now pregnant women shouldn't take it, but Dr. Faust, Dr. Loki, whatever his name is, he came on and he's like, oh, we're going to test women, our pregnant women, it's going to be safe eventually, but now the pregnant women can't take it. And they're kind of telling the story in a way which is going to drum up demand, and they drum up demand by making it feel exclusive. Not everyone can have access to it right away. That's part of the way which it's done. Then they talk about like, the Snopes like fact checking on the high tech vaccine tracking devices. And, the whole thing is just like, it's a friggin' joke. But it makes me laugh. And then they intermix these stories, which are so friggin' ridiculous. Like towards the end, they have this one, they start telling you about like, now you got to go and buy your stuff. And, the whole story right here is a major holiday shipping deadline, because that's something you have to be aware of. They're framing the argument for the viewer of, these are the things you should be concerned about, how it should be. Let's go back to buying stuff. You got to go buy stuff because, the major holiday shipping deadline is coming up. And then this news correspondent. She's giving, suggestions. I'm giving you suggestions on like, gifts which you can get people. Maybe a streaming membership, maybe an online gift card to a local restaurant. Like, there's once a time where the propaganda wasn't so ridiculous. I think this is also indicative of the mental capacity of the world. This goes back to, or at least the viewership of the news, it goes back to the whole notion of the movie Idiocracy and all that sort of stuff. But that's not really what I wanted to show you about with the news. That's not it. I mean, that's just kind of like, I was expecting something like that, which was going to kind of like, get me all riled up and like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe the people are falling for it. I do that tongue in cheek, but that does happen. Like I see it, and as we walk through what we're experiencing, and we're trying to, hold our centers as we go through it. You allow yourself a little bit of outrage, I suppose. But here's where it gets really interesting. This is what I want to show you guys today. Is this. So midway through the newscast, you could see it's like right here. Here's the red line. This is the beginning. This is the end. So right in the middle, they drop this one into the to the viewership, and it is the Zodiac Killer riddle solved. And they go in and they're like, we finally, 40 years, 50 years later, completely irrelevant. This has nothing to do with nothing. Okay, and they're telling you that we've solved the Zodiac Killer's riddle, and then what they not only is it irrelevant in the fact that it's this happened 70 years ago. What they've solved is completely irrelevant either, unless we want to go and look at this in like a Twilight language sort of way, and we're going to look at this a little bit that way. So this is what it says like when they solved it. And what does it say? I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me. Like, there's probably some double entendre in that, like in the telling of this to the national news story, on a national news outlet. And also keep in mind that probably the average age of the person who's watching it was probably alive during the Zodiac Killers. I want to say it happened in the in the mid 60s. So, someone who was probably born in the 40s would have been in their 20s at the time of it. That's who this is speaking to. And then think about this. We're going to think about this in a couple ways. We're going to think about what this is triggering in the deeper mind, So this is where we're getting into level 2 and level 3 of analysis of this propaganda. Is they're triggering all this stuff like Zodiac and Killer and fear. There's already fear. They've already playing a little bit. They've been drumming the fear drums since the Ides of March, but with this nonstop death toll, death toll, death toll, and all that sort of stuff. Fear, fear, fear. And now I'm going to go and touch upon this again in another major psyop. And but we want to keep in mind, the Zodiac Killer is specifically tied into the Zodiac. Okay, it's tied into the Zodiac, and this is what's being brought up in the mind. It's fear, and there's a serial killer is very similar to an indiscriminate killing virus. You can never relax because you don't know anything about it, and your death can happen at any given time. So this was brought up in the viewer's mind. It was brought up in the collective mind, all this sort of stuff, or at least the collective mind of the 1.4 million people who've seen this. And this is why I am kind of leading up to this. I'm like, why, Mike, are you talking so much about the Zodiac Killer in this presentation? I kind of see it, but you're still talking about it. It's because of how they structured their presentation. Okay, so this was the midpoint, and then we're going to go right here to where they close. This is where they close the story, and they close the news story with this. Lester Holmes, I think that's his name. Lester Holt. Lester Holt here, we see at the very end, spectacular sight, breaking news, and we've got Saturn right here, and it concludes with them showing this very, very clear image of Saturn. And this is really interesting, right? Because one, they've already just brought up 15 minutes earlier. So the typical person, because their mind is just they've been the ability to hold a thought is down to 2 seconds. They were saying that 10 years ago that the ability to hold a thought, the attention span of a human being is down to 2 seconds, less than that of a goldfish. So no one remembers 15 minutes ago that they just saw all of this, and now they're being concluded with Saturn, and it's oh, it's spectacular sight. We just scared you, we told you all this sort of stuff, and now we're going to end with this thing of Saturn and put this in your mind. And so this is going to hit on a lot of different levels. If you could think about it, I suppose, if you follow the narrative which David Icke puts out about Saturn, or maybe the Saturn death cult, or whatever. Saturn is a really there is, no matter how you want to look at it, Saturn is part of the occultic narrative within the elite, which is telling the story of the world. But then even more important, and what they did not mention at all in this story, is the fact that Saturn and Jupiter are about to hit their great conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, and that's going to happen on the 21st of December. I'm going to talk about the significance of that and why that matters towards the end of the video. But they cut out the whole Jupiter part. They cut out the whole context of the uniqueness of that, and they're just showing you Saturn. They're I want to put Saturn in your mind. So take that any way you want, but that is a really, really interesting, concrete way of how we're seeing this story being propagated to the mainstream, but then also for people who are interested in being able to read between the lines, to understand the twilight language, to understand the green language. There you go. It doesn't get any more. It doesn't get any more obvious than that. And so now I want to transition to the second part of our presentation today, And it's to go into, you know, everything is the Truman Show. Everything is a friggin' lie. Obviously that's a context or a perspective which I carry. I wouldn't be making these videos. You wouldn't be watching this. This I carried. I'm certain like you're aware of that. But as we strip down the layers and layers of all of our individual and collective conditioning over our lives, over like the lives of our parents, like really of the generation since 1945, we're beginning to become more and more and more clear as to the fact that it's all friggin' lies. It's all friggin' lies. And like, how deep does it go? And so the reason why I say that is I watched Wag the Dog again, and I recommend I'm assuming everyone here has seen Wag the Dog, and I saw it. I mean, last time I saw it was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was very telling then. But watching it now in the post-COVID world, it becomes even more tangible, and it's even more real. So if you're not familiar with Wag the Dog, it was a movie that came out in 97. It was directed by Barry Levinson, Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro were in it. It was basically, the plot of it was there was a political scandal in the White House, and they brought in this political fixer who created a completely false story, utilizing a Hollywood producer, and they were able to propagate it through the news media, and it was really like showing like a behind the scenes of how the world works. And so to put in context, so this came out in 1997. And this was more or less thought of as, particularly 97. So 97, I was like 25, 26. And I can kind of remember when this movie came out, but even more so, I can remember what my consciousness, my understanding of reality was at that time. Like at least I thought of myself as, someone who questions a lot, and like, I see through it. And you would see a movie like Wag the Dog as more metaphorical, like, this is an over-the-top representation of how things work to like make a point. And this came on the right after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and it was thought of like, this was more of like metaphorical related to like what happened after the Monica Lewinsky scandal and how it was kind of like handled. But it wasn't taken so literally. And then after, let's say, first beginning with the events of September 11th, and then maybe like Sandy Hook and all of these sort of things, as a generation began to re-examine media, this movie then started becoming popular. Like at that time, like 2007, 2008, everyone's like, go back and watch Wag the Dog. You can't believe it. They're telling you everything. And I remember, I was one of those people, and I went back and I rewatched. I'm like, holy crackers, what's going on? I can't believe this is how it's always been. So now going and looking at this with the COVID eyes or COVID perspective, and what's so unique about nowadays is how uniformly complicit all media is. Like that was the point of me showing this, like this story from the NBC News. There used to be like more and more, at least window dressing of there being objectivity, and there being, things are different. Like, there are competing forces, but it's becoming quite evident now that like Wag the Dog is probably just telling just a little bit of a snapshot into like how amazingly contrived all of the reality which is told to us through through media. And so now I want to go into I want to go into this. I was always interested in Wag the Dog for, because of what it told. But I was also always interested in that because it was directed by Barry Levinson. And interestingly enough, my mother went to the same high school, and I believe was in the same class as Barry Levinson, Forest Park in Baltimore, Maryland, But nonetheless, that's not the point of... There's a personal connection, which I had, but that's not really what I want to why I was so interested in this, in Barry Levinson. The reason why I was interested in Barry Levinson was... And this is probably, I think, around like 2012, and there was a documentary which came out by Jay Weidner. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a Kubrick documentary, and a lot of people saw it. And Jay Weidner puts forth, the idea that the movie The Shining was a mea culpa, was Stanley Kubrick's confession of faking the moon landing, of creating the movies of the moon landing for the U.S. government. And it kind of like this was him breaking it down and showing how the moon landing was filmed in a Hollywood soundstage, I think they're called. It was really interesting, and I remember that really got to me at the time. And at the time, like, Stanley Kubrick was really important within like the awakening eyes of the population, the portion of the population, which was beginning to see how ridiculous reality was. And Stanley Kubrick was positioned as like, one of the truth tellers. And so the Stanley Kubrick story was, as I'm certain you're probably all familiar, like, he created Eyes Wide Shut, and then he refused to re-edit it because it was too telling, and then that led to his death. I'm beginning to question that. I'm beginning to question, maybe that's just part of the story too. That's part of the Truman Show. But nonetheless, it's just my idea. But here's where I'm going with Barry Levinson, and this is why. It was said, and I haven't been able to find it, but I have held on to it in my mind. And I don't know if this was said in the Jay Weidner documentary, or I know that he did a whole bunch of interviews at the time. He was on a whole bunch of podcasts, and at the time I listened to whatever, like, Jay Weidner was going on. But there was something he said which stuck out in my mind. And the reason why it stuck out, the reason it held so much, was because he mentioned Barry Levinson, and I have this personal connection, like, not like personal, but my mother went to high school with him. And so, like, every time we can have like a personal connection with like a larger story, it tends to stick more. And so what Weidner had said, he said when he was telling the story of why Kubrick was killed for Eyes Wide Shut, he said that Kubrick had he had like a gold pass within Hollywood, that because he created this movie, this fake movie of the moon landing, that he was able to negotiate whatever he wanted to. And one of the things he negotiated was that he would have final editing control of whatever future film he were to do. And this was a rarity in Hollywood. And so, as the Kubrick story goes, was Kubrick went and he showed his cut of Eyes Wide Shut to the studio heads for whatever studio put it out. And the studio heads were like, no, you can't put this out. And Kubrick's like, I got this card, metaphorical card, maybe it's a literal card, who knows? And he's like, I can do whatever I want. And they're like, well, do whatever you want. And he's like, this is what I'm going to do. And then they killed him. Okay, that's the story which is put out. And I always was like, yeah, like, that sounds great. And I like that story. That story made a lot of sense to me. at the time. But this is what Widener said as well. Widener said Kubrick and Barry Levinson were the only ones in Hollywood that had that like gold card that I can produce whatever I want and I have final editing say. And I'm not in Hollywood. I don't know how Hollywood works, so I've got no way of knowing if that's an accurate statement or not. I don't know if any of that is true, so I want to go and be transparent. We don't know if that's true. It's even possible that my memory's wrong. Maybe I don't remember it right, but I think I remember it correctly, and we're going to run with this, or at least for where I'm going to go, where I'm going in this story with Levinson. With Levinson and Kubrick is. We're going to go with it being accurate. We're going to go and explore this idea. So it always stuck in my mind. I'm like, well, why would Barry Levinson have that ability as well as Kubrick? And it was positioned that Kubrick had that because he had done a favor for the government. So there was an implied correlation, we're going to get into this a little bit more, between the U.S. government and Hollywood. And so that's why Kubrick got it. And so, but why Levinson, and this movie came out before, Wag the Dog came out before Eyes Wide Shut was released. And what's also interesting is, as I indicated, as the mythology around Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut goes, is that he was killed. And that was, if you've seen Wag the Dog, that is more or less, or that happens to the Hollywood producer who creates all of these like fake stories, which are then used to create the fake news, which is then sold to the American public to cover up some other political scandal. So let's go and look at this a little bit. So, all right, we've got Kubrick, we've got Barry Levinson. First thing, and this is just like Wikipedia, and so like typically whenever you've got like someone who's somewhat famous in Wikipedia, they do this side panel where they show a person and they give like all of like the basic information, and they don't have that for Stanley Kubrick for whatever reason. I don't really understand like who, I know how Wikipedia is supposed to be this democratic or this free upload of information and everyone has access to it, but this isn't done for Kubrick, who is probably one of the most interesting Hollywood directors, who has the most fervent following. Like people are most interested in him, but what this means, why he doesn't have that, I don't know, but I just want to point that out. And I want to point out this is like, Kubrick did do a film called Barry Lyndon. We got a Barry Levinson, probably just coincidental, but I find that kind of interesting. These guys are obviously very different. He was born in 26, he was born in 42. They don't look anything alike. I'm not saying they're the same person, but I am saying there seems to be a link. And I do want to indicate that the character who was the producer, so Kubrick, I believe, was just a director. I don't know if he was a producer also. In the Wag the Dog film, his name was Stanley Moss, and he gets killed in the end. And the way that this Stanley Moss character was presented, he was supposedly a fictional version of the real life producer Robert Evans, but at no way meets the way which Stanley Kubrick was supposedly as a human being, like just in terms of personalities and styles. But nonetheless, these two guys are linked. And so I was curious about this. Going back to Barry Levinson, so the question was like, well, why would Barry Levinson have that link as well? Like, what did he do? Like, he made some pretty big films, but it's not like he made like he grossed the most amount of money, and that's why he was able to get that gold card. Steven Spielberg doesn't have it. George Lucas doesn't have it. Barry Levinson is probably best known for films like The Natural or Rain Man or films like that. But he had that nonetheless. So now I'm going to go and tell you something which I do see, which is similar between the two. And this is really significant as it relates to this Truman Show quality of reality. And particularly as it relates to like why everything, like all of the stories which we get from a screen, movies, television show, the news, arguably even this, everything you should take with a very, you should take with a guarded nature. Just anything you put in your mind, it should go through some degree of firewall. And the same thing, anything you put in your body should go through some degree of firewall, just at least being aware. So, the effect which we have, which media has on our inner stories is greater than we can imagine. It's so great. I want to give an example. I talked about this in a video I did recently about how important stories are. And they're really two stories. And arguably, maybe they're one and the same. But you have your internal story and you have your external stories. And they do this dance. They do this dance as our internal stories then create our outer reality. And then our outer reality creates our inner reality. And there's this push-pull. And the more control you have of your internal world, the more you have control of the outer world. It's inner will. And so I don't want to go down this line too much, but like we are led to believe that we control the outer world through outer will. We must force, through hard work in the outer world to control what our life is. And that's, that's a misnomer. What you really need to learn to control is the inner will. And that is how your mind works. And the most interesting thing about how our mind works is we don't even realize the things which we believe the most, and even more so, what we identify with the most are the most invisible to us, because we don't even realize that we're identifying with them, that we're believing them, because we just assume it to be true. But that's not the point I'm trying to make right now. The point I'm trying to make right now, and how I'm going to illustrate it, is how deep movies go into your mind. And so this is just like an anecdotal story. Dreams, I think dreams are very, very important. I don't claim to know what dreams are, but I think they're very, very worthy of exploration. And I think that there are multiple types of dreams, and part of understanding and going into our dream world and looking at it is understanding there are different types of dreams. So that being said, a very common question I ask all the people in my life, particularly in the morning, is like, did you have any dreams? Do you remember your dreams? What were your dreams? And, I listen, I pay attention. And one of the things which I have noticed, or if you're paying attention, you can begin to see both within yourself and with the people who you care about, that you can see how actual experiences in outer life show up symbolically in the dream world. I think that dreams are much more significant than simply parts of the day which need to be expressed in our consciousness so we can move on from that. Like that's kind of like a basic level explanation from a mainstream psychological perspective of, what our dreams are. They're just like, us releasing these sort of things that have happened within our waking lives. And there is a truth to that, but they're more than that, at least they are in my opinion. But what is true is the effects of our outer lives show up in the context of our dream world. And so something that happened in real life, something very close to that may show up as in your setting in the dreams. And what I've noticed most strongly, I can see that in regular life experiences, but I see it most strongly with movies. And this just happened last week. Me and my boys, we watched the movie, and this is just an example. We watched the movie, A $1 Million Baby. And if you're familiar with that, it was a Clint Eastwood film, and Hilary Swank was in it. She was a female boxer. And there was this one very dramatic scene in the film where she was boxing and her opponent, when the ref wasn't looking, she did like a cheap shot, and that was a big part of the dream, or a big part of the movie. And so the next morning after watching that, I asked my son, did you have any dreams? And typically my son's like, no, I don't remember my dreams. And, I still ask him every morning, but he was like, yeah, I do remember my dream. I might get this like maybe like 4 or 5 times a year from him. And he described his dream of he was playing soccer, and that's a sport he plays, and how the opposing player was holding him down when he was trying to get up, and it was done in a way which the ref was unable to see it. And 2 things which were interesting. One is my son did not recognize how that was obviously, and this was the night after watching Million Dollar Baby, that this is exactly the same context which Million Dollar Baby was. He didn't like put that together, like until I pointed it out. I'm like, oh, that's just like what we saw in the movie. And he was like, oh yeah, that was. But the point I'm trying to make here is that's what movies do. That's what media does. That's what all of this stuff does. It gets into our heads in ways, and it begins to work with our own stories. His dream, the meaning of my son's dream was much more personal to my son, and whatever that may be, but the symbology of the movie created the context of his inner story. And I'm showing this as an example. This is not like the exception. This is the rule. This is why dreams, this is why Hollywood magic is so important. Okay? So now let's go back to Kubrick and Barry Levinson. All right, let's go back to this. So I talked a little bit about that Widener documentary, and maybe you're familiar with it. And then there was another documentary which came out a little bit later, also about The Shining. It was called Room 237. And Room 237 is specifically about The Shining in general. And the documentary maker goes through all of these different people who've put a lot of time and energy and have seen within this movie, The Shining, these very, very well thought out stories. And Jay Widener is one of the people who was included in Room 237, and his moon landing theory, if you will. And he breaks down. He's like, the reason I say that, and he gives like 15 or 20 pieces of advice, and it all makes a lot of logical sense. And then here's another guy who comes in, and he's like, well, actually, the movie is all about the cultural assimilation of Native Americans. And he goes through all of this like detail, and he shows exactly where he came up with that. And then there's this other guy who comes up. He's like, no, it's all about Stanley Kubrick talking about the Holocaust. And here's the friggin' truth. Here's the truth of the matter. And what they did was, each one of these guys, they go and they show like there are these like subtle changes which Kubrick did as a director, which reconfirm in the viewer's mind whatever the viewer wants to see in it. It's like, yeah, you can see that. And you can see like these cans are changing, or like the sweater which the boy is wearing. And these stories are being propagated and propagated and propagated. And I guess it's possible that Stanley Kubrick could be telling multiple stories. Could be telling, if you watch the video or the documentary, you're going to be like, yeah, these guys, whether or not you agree with it or not, you could see the logic behind where they came up with their theories. But the truth of the matter is, what Stanley Kubrick was very, very good at was creating a cinema landscape which enables people to verify their inner narratives. To verify their inner narratives. That's the truth, because all of these people we saw created we have no idea what Stanley Kubrick was doing or saying, but there is evidence to suggest 1,000 different things. Okay, there's evidence to suggest 1,000 different things. Different narratives is what I mean by that. And so this is where it gets interesting with Barry Levinson. So I've been thinking about Barry Levinson and Wag the Dog and Stanley Kubrick ever since I watched Wag the Dog about a week ago. And what really just seeing the similarities of Wag the Dog and like the Stanley and the guy gets killed and like the supposed Stanley Kubrick thing and like Stanley Kubrick and Barry Levinson both have this gold pass. And look, listen, I'm doing the exact same friggin' thing which I'm saying these guys are doing. So I'm not necessarily saying that these guys are wrong as much as I'm pointing out this is the nature of reality. This is the nature of reality. But I want to point this out about Barry Levinson right now, okay? So here's an article, and this came from Vanity Fair, March 2012. And it says, much ado about nothing. For a little movie without special effects, dramatic reveals, or cutting-edge sex scenes, a movie about nothing at all, really, Barry Levinson's 1982 comedy Diner. Okay, this is where it gets weird, and we're talking about reality. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Diner. Came out in 1982, but was about a bunch of high school kids in Baltimore in the 50s. Okay? The reason why Barry Levinson was a big deal in my household is because my mom went to high school with Barry Levinson and he became famous on a movie called Diner. And my mom knew all of the people who Diner was based upon. And so I don't really remember Diner, but I remember having that connection. So, okay, we're going to go back to this. So Barry Levinson's 1982 comedy Diner caused a tectonic shift in popular culture. So this is Vanity Fair. So Vanity Fair is like as far as you can get with like highbrow when you're talking about popular culture. Vanity Fair is highbrow popular culture. You know, this is it. And when they're telling you that it caused this major shift in popular culture, this is a magazine, a storyteller which represents the highest level. They're saying like that Diner, Barry Levinson's Diner, caused a tectonic shift in popular culture. It paved the way for Seinfeld, Pulp Fiction, The Office. 3 decades later, I'm going to skip, I'm not so interested about the stars, but here's probably the most interesting, Kevin Bacon. We see like what Kevin Bacon represents. 3 decades later, S.L. Price reports how a novice director and his raw cast broke the rules and stumbled upon genius, okay? So what I really want to stress about this, so I guess this article is mostly about about Levinson, about the actors, but it's hinting at the fact that this style called the Diner, this style of storytelling, changed everything and created Seinfeld or laid the groundwork, if you will, for what would become Seinfeld, Pulp Fiction, The Office. And these are all TV shows about nothing. And I've talked about The Office a lot and how important that was. And I've never really talked about Seinfeld or Pulp Fiction, but definitely, or particularly with Pulp Fiction, or with Seinfeld, excuse me, but the significant ability to implant these ideas in the collective consciousness. So what this article is saying right here and what they're pointing out, they're saying that this movie, it changed everything. All right. So these are stories about nothing. These are stories about nothing, but they're made up stories. It's Hollywood. It's media. This isn't real. This is not a objective reality. It's objective reality on a certain level, but like level 2. What's primarily objective reality? Your experience, my experience. And what does that include? That is dreams. Okay? When you lived in a culture, when people lived in a culture without external reality, without external stories, without movies, without Hollywood, without all of this stuff, the most important stories were their dreams. And what are dreams? Dreams are stories about nothing. Okay? When you have a dream, there's no beginning, there's no end. It's like you wake up in the dream, something kind of happens, there's no real kind of like anything about it, and then it disappears. That's what all of these shows are about. That's what all of this is about. That's what Seinfeld, The Office, they're not about anything. They're not about your traditional storyline of like, how a story is told. And what Barry Levinson is What Barry Levinson is he's the person who introduced this style to the collective. And the reason why this is important, and I've covered this in the past, is everything, if you particularly, our reality is about resonance. It's about sympathetic magic. It's about when things are similar, when the more similar they are, the greater the ability to transfer across those connective lines. And so what we see with Barry Levinson, and so why we know that Barry Levinson has gotten the same pass as Stanley Kubrick, is that he has shown, he has created the mechanism to go directly into the dreaming mind of humanity, which has allowed us to create, news like this that will actually which would hold water. If you were to show this news to someone 50 years ago, they'd see right through it. They'd be like, that's ridiculous. But nowadays, this is going to go because it's so integrated with the dreaming mind of the individual that it's amazingly easy to drop these stories in the mind. All right. So let me move on to that. So that's Barry Levinson. That's Stanley Kubrick. I'm beginning to wonder, as it's becoming more and more and more real how fake everything is. The Kubrick stories, that's just part of the story as well. I'm not buying any of it. I'm not rejecting any of it. I'm just disconnecting with any of those storylines. So let's bring this up. This is just kind of fun to look at right here. Let's go look at this for the dreaming mind. Kubrick's famous depiction of the monolith from 2001 Space Odyssey, right after September 11th, that was implanted. This whole thing about the Hilton Millennial Hotel was right in the World Trade Center. Then this predated it even before the Seattle monolith. And then in the past couple weeks, the Utah monolith, though slightly different, a different version, because this is shown in a triangular sort of expression of it. But, we're seeing these dream-like images being, dripping into this collective consciousness. So I want to go a little bit more into the Hollywood world just because, I find this interesting and it's fun to deconstruct this reality. So probably the name which is the biggest name in terms of linking Hollywood to Washington, D.C. is this guy named Jack Valenti, and he was the head of the Motion Picture Association for 40 years. So Valenti began his professional career in 1952 as the co-founder of an advertising agency and political consultancy. The firm was extremely successful, and he cultivated contacts and favors, impressing, among others, Johnson, who tapped him to handle the media of President JFK's trip to Dallas on November 22nd, 1943. So this guy who was in charge of the Motion Picture Association for 40 years, he got his introduction to Hollywood on the day of, or to Washington, D.C. on the day of the JFK assassination. He was in the Dallas motorcade, and he flew on board the plane where Johnson was sworn in. If anyone has done any sort of looking into the JFK story, this is pretty well established. So, let's go a little bit deeper than that. Prior to Valenti was not the first. He was not the first president of the Motion Picture Association. Motion Picture Association began in 1922. When did he become the president of the Motion Picture Association? I don't see the date right here, but it was shortly after the JFK assassination. So we see that this was founded in 1922. Also tied into the Motion Picture Association is what's known as is central casting. And central casting it's become like a euphemism. I'm not in Hollywood, as I said, but I'm familiar with like that phrase, like, straight out of central casting. And it's talking about extras, because central casting was a casting company that specializes in the casting of extras, body doubles, and stand-ins. This also hints to like the beginning of Hollywood and the casting couch, and that's as common, that's as important of a story nowadays as the whole like Harvey Weinstein, like false, if you ask me, expose. But anyway, so we see that central casting was created in 1925 by Will Hayes, who was the first president of Motion Picture Association. He had a very scandalous past in Washington, D.C., and he created this very organized way of dealing with extras. And the reason why I want to talk about extras is like, really going deeper into this idea, which first came from Dallas Goldbug, whoever he is, as he talked about the actor-based reality. Now remember, a lot of... This is the thing which we got to keep in mind with what's going on. Like, this is the trickiness. This is the dream within the dream within the dream within the dream. Like, a lot of the people, who are telling what's going on are part of the dream as well. They're all players. But I love the idea of the actor-based reality, the lifetime actor. That's why I was kind of joking about this before. Am I joking? Am I not joking? I don't know. We don't know anything anymore. So we go back from the very beginning of Hollywood, from the very beginning of this connection of the Motion Picture Association, was this idea of central casting. And so I want to just go back and just point out, like, some of the extras. So switching gears just a little bit, we just hit the 57th anniversary of JFK's assassination. I talked a little bit about this on the show with Emily Moyer. She and I, we do a show and we're talking about 57. I talked about 57 as it related to my life a bunch last year, but I didn't realize at the time when I was talking about it, it had anything to do with JFK. And on November 22nd of this year, we marked the 57th anniversary, and there was supposedly Donald Trump was releasing the memorandum 57, which was supposedly JFK's document to break up the CIA, and that was being re-released by Donald Trump and all this sort of stuff. And I was talking about this to a friend of mine, Zach, and Zach goes and he shows to me, we're talking about JFK. It's like, hey, have you ever read Miles Mathis's take on the JFK assassination? And I wouldn't call myself like a JFK assassination guru. I know a little bit more than the average JFK conspiracy knowledge person, but by no means is it like one of my big hot buttons. I'd say it would be like a level 3. But my answer was like, no, I didn't know any. I don't know who this Miles Mathis. So he sent me over this PDF written by this guy, Miles Mathis. I'd never heard of Miles Mathis before. And I'm not saying that what this guy is saying is true or false, but I loved it, I'll tell you that. And Miles Mathis, because it was in light of all of this other stuff, which I'm kind of like seeing through. And Miles Mathis, he wrote this in 2007. It first appeared on the internet 2008. So I think it was about like 80 pages. And he writes this entire sort of thing. And he's like, listen, the JFK assassination never happened. Never, ever, ever happened. That was the conspiracy. Like, like part of like the dream within the dream was you're supposed to believe all of these different sort of conspiracies that were out there. But it was a conspiracy. It was meant to give you that, because the real truth, at least according to Mathis, was like JFK just went underground and like, he always just ruled from the caves. Again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm not saying that's false, but I friggin' love the idea, because I'm becoming more and more and more more and more accepting of the fact that all of our stories are lies. And I'm going to come to why this matters in a moment, but I want to walk through this a little bit, and I want to tell you why I was talking about central casting. So this is what Mathis's the whole premise of his take on JFK, and like, you know, all of the autopsy photos are fake, and all of this stuff is fake, and it's all fake. It's fake, fake, fake. It's friggin' Truman. It's Truman. Like, you know, we've all been saying it's the Truman Show for at least since the Truman Show's been coming out, since 9/11. But like, we've still been thinking the Truman Show is real, or parts of where we think we're seeing the set of the show is really, you know, still, what we think is seeing through the sets of the show are really still part of the sets. So we talked a little bit about central casting, and so forth. Let's go right here. This is one of my favorite takes on the JFK assassination, and this is James Shelby Doward's King Kill 33, and I highly recommend reading it. And so Shelby Doward definitely takes a viewpoint of understanding it from a ritualistic, dreaming mind, like twilight language perspective of what's happening within the understanding the JFK assassination. But he also holds, though, the context that it was an actual assassination as opposed to just something which was faked, which is what Mathis is suggesting. But nonetheless, whether there was a true shooting or not, I don't know. I don't care. But what I do know, I don't care for the purpose of this particular, what I want to talk about right now, is Shelby is so spot on as it talks about the dreaming mind. That's what this is all about, the dreaming mind. And what's interesting is Shelby and one of his, I guess, I don't know if they were colleagues or not, but Michael Hoffman, he's always writing about, or he wrote a lot about, like, you know, how the entire Zodiac Killer was part of the dreaming mind, and this being brought back up again. But what Shelby brought up, which was so interesting, was this idea of how the three vagabonds, the three tramps, which were picked up in Dallas, and which were showcased very heavily in Oliver Stone's. Remember, it's all the Hollywood stuff. Oliver Stone is supposedly, you know, he's the truth teller. He's the truth teller. He plays the role of the truth teller within the Hollywood story. You know, he goes really into like the three ruffians, and he points them out. Shelby links these three guys to actually being part of the Masonic ritual of the three ruffians. And, you know, I'm assuming you have some understanding of the Hiram Abiff ritual within Freemasonry, and that's what Shelby is saying these characters represent. And I think Shelby's spot on, because Shelby's analysis, like, you know, it does fit. Again, this is like, you know, we're reading into the dream, but that's part of how the reality works. This is why understanding what your story is and writing your own story is so important, and the dream is going to support it. But Shelby is showing that these ruffians, these three tramps, as they're told in like the mainstream story, are actually the ruffians from the Hiram Abiff story. And then he points out, Shelby points out that who one of those ruffians was in real life was Charles Harrelson, the father of Woody Harrelson, who starred in Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. We're starting to begin to see how this all connects. So who was this three ruffian? He was an extra. And where do the extras come from? The extras come from central casting. And it's part of this, you know, this actor-based reality, this, like, all of reality, all of the stories which were being told in our reality are also part of like this Truman Show like reality. And even when we come to this level, you know, you're myself included, when you're seeing this, you're seeing like, oh, okay, yeah, it's fake, it's all fake. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So now I want to go on to like the point of all of this, and let's go back. So what is true? or at least more true than at least the Hollywood story, you know. You really can see Saturn. Saturn's really happening right now, and you can see it with your eyes. I'm not too certain, and I don't know. I'm saying I don't know what Saturn is. I certainly don't suggest that Saturn is inherently the mythology which has been tied to it, both astrologically and just like, you know, through our Greek and our Roman mythologies. I don't know if it's planet. I don't know what it is, but I do know that it is a thing which can be identified in the sky. And we do know that Saturn and Jupiter are they're coming together. And if you go outside, or at least where I live right now, and I don't know if this is true for everyone on Earth or if this is just true for people who are on the East Coast of the United States, but when I go out at night, like shortly after it gets dark out, for me that's about 6 p.m., and if I look towards the west, I'm able to see with my own eyes, I can see Saturn and Jupiter. And you could see there from the perspective of the night sky, they're about an inch apart. And you can identify from that, they're close enough that you can see what's known as the ecliptic, the line which all of the planets move upon. Again, we don't know what planets are. We just know that they do move and they're different than all of the stars, and we can identify with them. Something is happening in reality as right now, in our reality. This is a truth. So now we're going to go into, maybe this is not the objective truth. We don't know what the objective truth is. All we know is we're here. That you can say for certain. And everything else is going to come with an acceptance of a story. And we don't necessarily, you're going to go crazy if you try to get to the bottom of the truth. You're going to go paranoid. You're going to go and try to find something you can't. But what you can do is begin to go to as solid ground as you possibly can with your understanding of reality. And what we know is happening right now in the reality which is being sold to us is that how life on Earth is happening is changing, and it's changing all over the world. The truth is it's changing. What it's going to change into, we don't know what that is. We know that this is all timed also to something which is very unique, which is happening in the heavens, and something you can see with your own eyes. Not something which you go and you listen to some guy on the internet. You go outside and you look at it. And you look at it without understanding what it means, and you see it, and you begin to understand that you are standing on Earth, and you're beginning to understand that everything that you've ever been sold and told about what life is and the purpose of life on Earth is probably a friggin' lie. But it's also malleable, that reality will give you what you're looking for. And the biggest truth in reality, which you can see right now, is that those dots in the sky are coming together and they're going to touch. And you know when they're going to touch? They're going to touch on December 21st, which for us who live in what they're telling us is the northern hemisphere is the shortest day of the year. I don't know what the hell the southern hemisphere is, but that's your longest day of the year. What I also know, particularly, I'm gonna ground this in northern hemisphere life, because that's where I live. The shortest day of the year means it's going to be your most internal, your most inner work, your most inside yourself, your inner, within your own thoughts, within your own heart. Likewise, they're cranking up. You can't go outside, and even if you're going to defy, which I recommend, even if you're going to defy, you're not really going to have many places to go. So everything is saying you're going to go inside. And why are you going to go inside? Because now is the time to really create your stories, to really come up with a new story. And this is a tough time because this is what? All of the stories are lies. Oh, I want to retire here. I want to save this money. I want to go do this. I want to go do that. All of that is friggin' lies. That's the bad news. You know what the good news is? Here's the good news. You get to start from scratch. This is not a time of leaders. This is like, here's the thing which is interesting. And I'm going to do another video breaking down astrology, what it is and what it isn't, why you want to pay attention to it, why you don't want to pay attention to it. So I'm going to use a little bit of astrology. I'm not saying this is universal truth, but I am saying we've been born into an astrological world, and our culture has been created by people who are astrological storytellers and followers. And so our understanding of reality, whether or not you recognize it or not, is astrological. And from that perspective, two things are happening right now. We're moving into a new time period, a new epoch, the end of it, the ellipse of an epoch or an apocalypse. And so that means everything is changing. And we're seeing that right now. And we get to have a new one. And the one which they're saying we're moving into is all about freedom. And it's all about a collective balance. It's not about hierarchy. So that means there's no leaders. There's no one to look to. This means that we understand and figure this thing out for ourselves, and we recognize our own freedom and each other's freedom. I suggest using that as beginning to understand what the story is that you're going to begin to tell and identify with. It's not an easy thing to do, and we're going to talk more about what that means, but it's pretty much the only game you have in town right now, because the only other game you have is fighting their story. And if you're fighting their story, then you're in their story. You need to reject that story and create your own. Now, here's the second part of what we're telling right now. Here's the second part of the story. Is Jupiter and Saturn, they're coming together. They're conjuncting. They're conjuncting at 0 degrees Aquarius. So from an astrological perspective, and this is just one story. So what this means is Jupiter is all about expansion. Jupiter is all about aspiring, going for something greater than ourselves. This is where our dreams and our aspirations are. Saturn is all about limitation, but it's more so about structure. It's about limitation so that we can build structure and discipline. And too much Saturn is too much structure and not enough freedom, and too much Jupiter is all about just ideals and nothing real. And when the two come together, it is a blending. And this is just astrological theory. I'm not saying this is true or not, but, we live in an astrological world. And this is part of the consciousness. Whether you want to continue to be in it or not, that's up to you. But you are affected by it. We all are. And so what this time means is it is the time of linking together aspirations, your Jupiter, with the grounding of Saturn, with the discipline and structure. So it is a very realistic dreaming. So this is the time to dream and be realistic. Not necessarily realistic in I have to fit it to a model, but realistic in terms of it can take root. That's what we have in front of us right now. That's what's going on in this world. If you've hitched your wagon to the way things used to be, you are going to find yourself in a very, very upsetting place. If you've hitched your wagon to wanting to fight the system, which is being forced upon the mainstream masses, you're going to find yourself in an upsetting place. All you can do now is to create a new story. And this story has to, or at least I suggest it does, it has to be based upon freedom and harmony with the greater whole. And when I say the greater whole, I mean that in the greatest perspective. So, now let me go end up with Hollywood again. Let's go close this up with Hollywood. So I've never watched It's a Wonderful Life. I never watched that movie. I knew what it was. And what It's a Wonderful Life is a Christmas film from back in the golden age of Hollywood. And I watched it for the first time last couple days. Obviously, I've probably watched more movies and TVs in the last week than I have in a very, very long time. But the premise behind It's a Wonderful Life is about this guy, and he faces the world, and he gets beaten down by the world, and he comes to this bridge, and then he is visited by a guardian angel, and then he sees things in a different perspective, and then he retells his story of himself, and he has a new reality. And It's a Wonderful Life has been thought of as this very, very uplifting kind of story. And I knew that. It's a Wonderful Life had always been that. And I'm watching the film knowing that. I'm like, why am I watching this right now? So, yes, that did happen, and I think that's a very poignant, and it's very significant to what I was just saying, just before, which is now is quite literally the time that we need to begin writing our own story and recognizing that all the stories we've been told have been false stories. If you're you might recognize that, but if you're still holding on to something which has been told, which is part of the old culture, I bet you if you scratch hard enough, you're going to realize that it's bullshit as well. So, all right, but that being said, we can still use this. We can still use this to boost ourselves up. All right, so I'm going to go and do that for you. So too many coincidences to ignore. So It's a Wonderful Life takes place in Bedford Falls, and It's a Wonderful Life. Too many coincidences to ignore. Seneca Falls was the upstate New York village of Seneca Falls, Frank Capra's inspiration for the design. And it goes on. Here are all these similarities between Bedford Falls, which is fictional, and Seneca Falls, which is real. And they make a very, very, very strong argument that they are one in the same. So why is this significant? Well, if you've been listening to any of my videos, you know that Seneca, the book Gaia Matrix is really significant to me. And if you know that, Seneca Falls is very, very significant. And so what they're showing right here is Seneca Falls is, from the book, The Gaia Matrix, is the epicenter of all of these different ley lines. And the idea behind the author's presentation of Gaia Matrix is the occurrences of these different ley lines has spun out upon Earth and influenced the Earth. So each of these key places here and here and here, they have had rippling effects upon life on Earth, whatever life may be. So going back to this and this wonderful life and being able to connect into this idea of retelling our story. It's not just us. You know, I'll give you two ideas right now. Two ideas if you want to go and ground it to another story. So we've got a Buddhist idea, which is saying that, you know, no one leaves until we're all enlightened. And then we got like more of a Christian idea from the book of Revelations, which says at the end of the apocalypse, 144,000 people disappear. If you're watching this, I'm going to suggest you're part of the 144,000. Maybe you stick around to go take the rest of humanity. I don't know. But things are changing and reality is different than what we know it. I don't claim to know what it is, but I do claim to say that it is not whatever we think it is, and to free our mind of what that is, but also be playful with it. And so I'm playing with this idea right now, and I'm playing with, this is why, you know, I showed you my Susquehanna mystery map. This was a key point in what I created on that map, and this is what I'm playing on, is retelling the story and understanding how I tie into, just by the ability to look with my own eyes, of where Saturn and Jupiter are coming together in the heavens, whatever the heavens may be, whatever space may be. I can see it, I know I'm part of it, and I can see to some degree of what is happening. So my friends, I told you this was an ambitious project. That's the game that's afoot, at least from my perspective. And I'm not saying that my perspective is the only one. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong, but what I am saying is that hopefully some of these ideas can spark something within you to take advantage of this time and to begin to consciously think either of how to release these old storylines of both of what life on Earth looks like, of what your life looks like, but then also begin to become open to creating new storylines. Because if you're not going to create your own, I guarantee that there is someone else who's going to create a storyline for you. And you're going to find yourself unconsciously playing in their story and not your own. So it's with that, we wrap this one up. Enjoy your day, and I'll talk to you soon. This is Mike.